one of the things you really gain an appreciation over is just how hard a thing can be when you actually go ahead and do something. I never really knew how hard it would be to just go ahead and sit in front of a camera and almost give a free flowing dialogue of consciousness. And it's a lot harder than I thought it would be. So I just thought I'd share that to start. But the topic that I wanted to talk a little bit about today was mistakes and the guilt and shame that's so often associated with the mistakes that you've made in the past. So clearly you're going to make mistakes. One of the things that's often said in response to your making mistakes is you learn from your mistakes so you don't make them again. But I found it a little bit challenging to always reconcile with that idea because, at least for me, I found myself making similar mistakes again and again. Not the exact same mistake per se, but the same kind of mistake. And one of the thoughts that came to mind concerning that was how much the mistakes you make are related to your specific personality traits. So for instance, if you take the ocean model, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, there are their attendant virtues with each of the traits, as well as potential pitfalls a person could succumb to. So, like, let's take agreeable versus disagreeable as a starting point. If you take someone who's disagreeable, they're often categorized as someone who's hyper-competitive. So they don't like to lose; they want to win, and that could create friction across your interpersonal relationships because of your desire to win, and sometimes like the desire to win at the cost of your personal relationships. And on the reverse side, on the flip side, with agreeableness, like that, you can fall into the pitfall of, let's say, failing to speak up for yourself when you feel like there's something that needs to be said. So when you feel like perhaps you're being taken advantage of in some instance, because the tendency for an agreeable person is to want to give more to the other person as opposed to kind of standing up and saying like, this is what I need in this situation. So like with that as an example, as our starting point, the person who's competitive isn't going to be competitive in that one instance. They're going to be competitive in whether, like, let's say it's sports, for instance, they'll be competitive in the first match they play, they'll be competitive in the second match they'll play. And the tendency when they're in situations is like that is for emotion to get, they could get quite intense. So the point I'm trying to make there is emotions can quickly rise, and when emotions are kind of inflamed in those kind of situations, you could very quickly come to make decisions that you would later regret. And what I found as to kind of what would be, I guess you could say, an indication that a person is genuinely trying to make amends with that part of themselves that they recognize could be better if they were willing to seek that part of themselves out and willing to take the steps necessary to actually improve that part of themselves. That first they acknowledge and take responsibility for their shortcomings in a situation. So if they've, for instance, lost their temper, or like if we look at it a little bit more broadly across other personality dimensions, for instance, like let's say the person's highly open, so they're an incredibly creative person, that person might struggle to focus, or like a neurotic person who's more liable to neurotic emotion, they may see trouble where others wouldn't, and perhaps they could falsely raise alarms, let's say. So anyways, acknowledgement of an area where you can improve is a key. The adoption of responsibility for the shortcomings where you actually personally feel like you've felt short. But then on top of that, it's when, if you're put into situations where you're feeling those same kind of emotions and a similar opportunity presents itself where you have an option of how you would respond in that situation. And if we go back to the topic that I was talking about yesterday, where like you meet the devil at every decision, it's like, are you going to choose to act in a way that leads you to become more of the person you want to be, or are you going to allow that part of yourself, whether it's, you can be possessed by spirits, right? So it's like, are you going to let the spirit of your competitiveness drive you down? Because competitiveness cannot, like, so oftentimes result in anger and a lot of aggression. So are you going to let that part of yourself bring you down, or are you going to stick and align with the part of you that wants to make a change to align itself with that which is best within you? So when faced with those types of situations, are you handling them different? Are you going about it in a different manner? Because I think that's what's ultimately the signal of the growth that a person experiences across their personality. It's if presented with a similar situation, can you handle it in a more mature manner? And it also ties back to another idea, that being, if you were better, could things have turned out differently? And I think that's the case, right? Where you've recognized certain shortcomings. You say, this is where I fell short. You say, I accept that this is where I fell short. These are the steps that I hope to take to be able to reconcile those mistakes. And now I'm going to see to it that I actually go ahead and do the things that I say I'm going to do. So, like, with that being said, I feel that when you're placed into those kind of situations that you know you can fall privy to making the same kind of mistakes, can you go into those situations with a certain degree of emotional control and awareness that you are liable to make those kind of mistakes? So can you go into those kind of situations with calmness, a sense of control over your emotions, and a sense of compassion with the people that you're interacting with? Because I also feel like it's so often the case that, at least it's the case with me, where the way another person reacts to the messaging or the words, delivery of words, I should say, can really lead to a pretty profound difference in the actual outcome of like a conversation. Let's say you're trying to get to the bottom of a problem that you're facing. It's like you've identified a problem. Are you willing to be the kind of person who wishes to derive a genuine solution to that problem? Are you looking to be, I guess the ultimate question there is like, what is it that you want from that kind of situation? What kind of outcome do you want? Do you want to solve the problem genuinely, or are you looking to, let's say, vent the emotions that are accompanied by the situation that you find yourself in? So yeah, I mean, all that's to say is I feel that with the mistakes that you're liable to fall into, can you be the kind of person who enters similar situations with a certain level of care and precaution to take steps that you could take to prevent you from making that mistake again? And I feel like with, at least when it comes to interpersonal relationships and dialogue, to solve the problem, are you willing to hear the other person's side of the story? Are you willing to listen? Are you willing to sit back and shut up and just let the other person say what they have to say? Almost no bars held. Yeah, I think that's the phrasing. Might be wrong, but are you willing to hear the person out for what they have to say and how they feel? And when they share how they truly feel, are you willing to accept that that's how they feel, and acknowledge that that's the way they feel? And I feel like the one other element that I would say is when you're going about trying to rectify your mistakes, or going about the process of trying to set yourself on firm ground so that you don't make similar mistakes again in the future, what is that firm ground that you can stand on? And I feel like a lot of it revolves around getting your priorities straight. So, for instance, asking yourself, what's the purpose of you going ahead and attempting to solve this problem? What are my priorities? What kind of general principles and values do I want to carry in each of the interactions that I have with other people, regardless of the kind of interaction that I have with them? And I feel like if you can be clear on your priorities, if you can be clear on what it is you value and the principles upon which you wish to stand, then you're setting yourself upon firm ground to go into the variety of situations that you'll find yourself in throughout your life with kind of like a guiding star saying, no matter the externals that kind of happen in those kind of situations, this is the way I kind of want to act. This is the way I want to carry myself. This is the way I want to interact with other people, regardless of the externals. And I also feel like another kind of pillar a person could go back onto regarding this kind of situation is, are you working to rectify the mistakes that by your own account you've made locally? Um, so are you working to quote unquote stand upon firm ground with your family, for instance, with the relationships that you have with your siblings, or the relationships that you have with your parents or friends? Are you bringing the same principles and values that you would with a person who you don't necessarily have as close a relationship with as the people who you say you have the closest of relationships with? Because that's something that I've struggled with too. Um, that's like with my brother, for instance, I can sometimes struggle to communicate messaging with him the same way I would communicate to a stranger. Um, yeah, and it's been something that I've personally tried to work on. Um, in terms of going into the conversation with the same level of care and respect that I would with a student of mine or a friend of mine. And I feel like if you could turn yourself into the kind of person who's locally willing to take upon themselves the responsibility of upholding their principles, morals, and values in the tiniest of situations, the so-called tiniest, with your relationships, with your most immediate relationships, and with the so-called most trivial aspects of your life, then you set yourself upon the ground where the future you could handle greater and greater responsibilities that call for the need for you to have those principles, those values, those morals firmly established. So um, I think that's about all I have to say concerning that. Something that I'm trying to do is be aware of my tendency to ramble when I'm giving these kind of talks. And I'm genuinely trying to do my best to connect and interweave these concepts as best I can. And by going back and watching some of these videos, I find it remarkable how many times I or take a pause or go and that's something that I hope I can work on and improve. I guess I'll leave you with this thought. And it's interesting because right before recording this, I had gone back and watched a couple videos I had recorded for some of the tennis courses that I was running over COVID-19 for some of my junior players. And it's remarkable to see the way I presented myself on film then compared to how I suspect I'm presenting myself now. And the progress that I've made since then. It's not necessarily like I've spent a lot of time on camera, but I hope that I'm coming at these videos from a more genuine place, because it was funny. I was so trying to sell things when I had recorded those old videos, and it was just funny to look back and see. But the point of this is, through the process of going through and doing things that make you uncomfortable, the question that's worth asking yourself is, what skills are you developing today that will allow you to go ahead and not necessarily accomplish, but take on ever greater challenges tomorrow. So that's about it. Thanks.